All right, welcome on everyone to a Hawaiian shirt edition. Gonna be.
Do you want me to go change? I can put one on. I can go change. I've been there once or twice. I have some.
Yeah, well, my wife has family here, so we're staying with them for the next 3 weeks, and I will try to make sure that my background stays as dark as possible, so you can't see that there's nothing behind me. But yeah, I got the 100-foot Ethernet cord attached to the router downstairs, so hopefully we won't have too many problems here. Let me just tweet this thing out, and then we can get rolling. So sorry, we're a little bit early, but in deference to the Hawaii time zone, figure we would probably catch more people, including Danny, if we started earlier.
I will hopefully be more awake.
Let's see here. There's always so many windows to open and so many things to do when it comes to social media. I hope everyone is finding this absolutely riveting right now. Thankfully, this doesn't show up on the podcast. But all right, let's do it on X. All right, let's do a podcast. All right, welcome on to a Sunday night edition of the pod. Thanks to everyone who's watching on YouTube. Please give us a like and subscribe there. And same thing, a nice review or something if you're listening on the public pod. Or you can just not have to listen to any ads if you want to sign up for Dunc'd on Prime. We got a lot to get through, Danny. Let's begin with the Lakers and Denver game. I have this kind of nagging feeling in the back of my mind that maybe the Lakers don't match up too well at the Nuggets.
It was wild how, in certain ways, this paralleled their last playoff series. For those who didn't watch, the Nuggets played they were a little bit flat. I also thought the Lakers played well in the first half. This is just the bird's eye view. We'll talk in more detail. And then the Nuggets came back, had this just ridiculous third quarter, and were able to really put the pedal to the metal. It was 37-15 Nuggets in the third, and then they had a comfortable win. And yeah, they don't match up particularly well. But let's start this with the Lakers stats.
Yeah, the LA Lakers. Scroll down, find them here. I'm sorry, the Los Angeles Lakers. It is the LA Clippers. 10-6, 5-2 since we last checked on them. A couple of disappointing losses. First, they got beat by Franz Wagner on that crazy three. And then, of course, getting blown out here by the Nuggets. So despite being 10-6, they actually have a negative 0.3 net rating, losing by 25 to the Nuggets. We'll hear that's 15th in the NBA. They are 5th on offense and 24th on defense. They project for a 44-38 record per BPI and the 8th seed, 63% chance of making the playoffs. And this is something that reared its head in the Denver game. Their transition defense numbers are absolutely awful so far.
Horrendous. The Lakers are giving up. So Clean the Glass has this in terms of points plus per 100 possessions. The league average is giving up 2.6 points plus per 100 possessions. And no team other than New Orleans and the Lakers is worse than 4.1. The Lakers are giving up 6. So they're more than double the league average on this stat. And how that's happening, the Lakers are giving up the third highest opponent transition frequency, almost 18%. And opponents have an offensive rating in transition, all transition, of 141.5 and a jaw-dropping 139.3 off of a live rebound. So they're getting killed off of live rebounds the way that most teams are off of steals.
Yeah, and I've always thought that that's due to a number of factors. And, of course, J.J. Redick would have tried to fix this, but he also wanted to offensive rebound more. So I think that's been part of it. They have gotten better on the offensive glass. So you might even say that it's worth the trade-off. And I'm not going to say that it isn't. Now, coaches would say, well, all right, you can crash and get back as well. So their personnel, though, kind of lends it to that. AD and LeBron, not guys who typically sprint back that hard on transition defense. You'll see them complain to the referees a lot. And those are the two guys who are going to stop the opponent at the basket because they don't really have any other sort of rim protector. Their guards are pretty small and unathletic generally as well. So if LeBron and oftentimes AD don't get back, then the other team is going to feel like they have license to go right to the basket.
And another concerning thing for the Lakers, we refer to this a fair amount on 1560s, but Christian Arsu did great work on how many games you need for a sample to get past an R squared of 0.5. So basically half of the eventual outcome is explained by what we've already seen. And we're deep in the season. We're getting into some of the ones that have that take a lot more time to resolve. But one of the stats that kind of gets that R squared of 0.5 around now is opponent 2-point field goal percentage. And the Lakers are giving up the worst, so the strongest for the opponent, 2-point field goal percentage in the Western Conference, third worst in the NBA. So 57% opponents are converting on twos. That is only better than the Bulls and the Sixers. And so if you think that that's mostly stabilized by this point, and it's transition defense is a part of that. Having no centers other than Anthony Davis is a part of that. And it's just that's a challenge for the Lakers to potentially navigate. We brought up how they're 24th in defense. Well, if you're going to be towards the bottom, probably in 2-point field goal percentage, well, that's going to be hard to overcome.
Yeah. Now, again, that could be in part because they're giving up a lot of layups in transition. So It might be easier to fix than if they're just getting destroyed in the half court. If they could figure out a fix to this transition defense, maybe by personnel or emphasizing different things. I don't know if AD and LeBron are going to turn over new leaves at this point in their careers. Let's get into that game now against the Nuggets.
For sure. And I've had a couple of significant takeaways from it. As I mentioned, the Nuggets relied on that big 37-15 third quarter to win, and some for both teams. And so I believe that the Lakers do not need D'Angelo Russell starting. That he's a talented basketball player. You could argue, if you want to, that he's one of their 5 best basketball players, but they don't really need what Russell brings as aggressively on the offensive end in that starting lineup. However, the fundamental problem, and I thought we saw this at times in Sunday's loss, is that they don't have another 5th player. I mean, you would hope that maybe like they tried Cam Reddish. He can do it defensively, but he's such a non-factor offensively that he creates challenges for them on that end. You would love for that to be Gabe Vincent. He's had a really star-crossed time overall with the Lakers, hasn't gotten that opportunity starter. Maybe you go with Max Christie, or if he has a really good continued stretch, he's had some big games, Dalton Connect. But there isn't really a great fit to be starting next to LeBron, Rui, AD, and Austin Reeves.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, D'Lo does kind of profile more as a 6th-man type with this group now that they're giving Austin Reeves, successfully, I might add, more reps as the on-ball lead creator, and I think he's better than D'Lo, so that makes sense to me. But yeah, I mean, they're really going to struggle to find who that other guy's going to be now. Jared Vanderbilt coming back from that bilateral foot surgery. Maybe it could be him, and he could really boost the defense. Like Cam Reddish is so limited on the offensive end. Like he gives him some decent size there, but he's not a playmaker the way that Vanderbilt is. So that's I don't think he's going to be a panacea either, because when he's on the floor, then their 4th-ranked offense will take a hit. But certainly he's a better player than really anyone else coming off the bench other than maybe Connect.
And we'll talk big picture about the Lakers at some point, but like, this would be the obvious, well, then you use some of your resources to trade for somebody, but are you a good enough team to do that? And that was your storyline going into the 23-24 season. And I mean, that's a conversation that we'll probably have at a later date. And then on the Lakers front, another takeaway that I had from this one was that it was remarkable, and this is credit to the Nuggets and blame to the Lakers, that I was stunned at how few good shots LeBron and Anthony Davis were either getting or generating. And there were moments in time where I thought that worked a little bit better for the Lakers. But when you think about the Nuggets, Peyton Watson has stepped into the starting lineup. He did a good job. He's had some tough defensive assignments over these couple games, and he's playing. Apparently, he suffered an adductor strain in that win over the Lakers. That doesn't seem like it's going to cause him to miss time. An adductor strain, I believe that was the issue that caused Zach LaVine to miss some time, but maybe it's less severe. Hopefully, it is less severe. And so I thought that the Lakers just weren't generating a ton of good shots, especially compared to what Denver did at certain moments in time. And for example, the Lakers in the competitive portion of the game had a 79 first shot half court offensive rating and only 6 offensive rebounds. So it isn't like they were, getting it in some other way. And they shot reasonably well from 3. And this isn't mostly a stats-based box score argument. It was watching the game. The shots they were getting were so much harder than the Nuggets. And Jokic's individual brilliance is a part of that. But the Lakers, against a team that is good defensively but doesn't have elite defensive talent, especially available, I thought they should do better.
Yeah, I would say so, and especially given how good their offense has been. But I think the Denver Nuggets can be a pretty good defensive team when they put the right guys out there, or maybe when Jamal Murray looks at a film session and sees that that he was really bad the night before. But I guess what I would say too about the Lakers is they don't necessarily have great options to attack mismatches, nor do they have great shooting. And I'm very interested to see where this team ends up at the end of the year, because AD has been great. He struggled in this one. He's had plenty of big games offensively against the Nuggets. He was very good offensively in that series a year ago. I thought less so 2 years ago, but he was 6 of 19. He took 7 jumpers. He made one of them. And that's not what they want him doing either. So I thought the Nuggets did a pretty good job. Lakers will shoot a little bit better from floater range than the 3 or 14 that they did. But was there anything that you saw against Davis? Like, was it just nothing would happen on the possession and he would just have to take a jumper at the end, or was he getting inside and they were just swarming him because there wasn't enough space? So what would you say?
I thought there were some settles. I mean, Davis tries to get his jumper going, and a lot of this season it's gone better for him, and that's part of why his scoring numbers have been so good this year. But
Monty Williams, Alvin Gentry, Frank Vogel, Darvin Ham, they really are, JJ Redick, they wanted to shoot more threes. They wanted to get comfortable out there.
Yeah, and but I mean, Davis, it really, that 2020 bubble, I wonder how we'll think about that. But he has shot better overall this year than he has at other points in time. And for LeBron, I mean, he's had some really good games after I basically said he was done as a game-to-game force. He's had
don't be that harsh. I mean, you're basically saying, like, you don't expect him to, like, bring it every single night. Is essentially
and he hasn't. I mean, he's had a couple of big, like, 30-plus point games, including he had one against the Magic a couple nights before the loss to Denver. But, I thought that he got a couple of things around the basket. But again, like, you can generally, as an index for LeBron James at this point in his career, for his aggressiveness, is what is his ratio of jump shots to shots in the paint. And I thought that he wasn't getting a lot around there. And Peyton Watson did have some really nice plays. And it's not only the blocks, it's the assurances and everything else. But speaking of teams that don't have backup centers, Denver is not robust in that area as well. And so, yeah, I think it was a mixture of things. Also, the Lakers turned the ball over a ton. Both teams did, but the Lakers, like, they can sometimes be a little bit more fastidious with it, and they were just a couple of, like, I like to delineate between forced and unforced errors, and I thought the Lakers had more unforced errors than the Nuggets did. So that part's not fantastic. And then it
must have also really. There's for the Lakers too. Obviously, this thing. I think they've lost 13 of 14 against Denver. AD had one of his 3 games this year shooting under 50%. So, all right, you could point to that part maybe being an aberration. But not only is it Michael Malone who has trolled the Lakers and their fans over and over again in the course of this 13-1 stretch, but then it is Russell Westbrook coming off the bench for he did not have a good game because he only had 7 rebounds, but he had 14 points, 11 assists, 6 of 10 from the field. He had a massive tip dunk in the fourth quarter, after which he clowned on the Lakers and their fans. So this is definitely a rough loss for LA from an emotional standpoint.
And you saw the Lakers pretty aggressively not defend Russell Westbrook. So it was the second night in a row that we saw that, because we discussed it in the NBA Cup game. And Westbrook didn't make his threes in this game, but he did. I thought he played within himself reasonably well. He had a couple where he got a little bit baited into it, but I thought he did a reasonable job, and he had some really incisive passes, as Westbrook does when he's at his best. And having the spacing, Denver isn't the greatest spacing team, but they have guys that you have to respect out there.
Yeah,
Michael
they're
Porter
actually
was
at the top of the league in actual 3-point percentage.
But the volume,
there's one guy who's really pushing that pretty hard.
Yeah. And then one other thing I wanted to talk about, kind of a big picture part of this, and it's interesting. I put the note in because I had this theory. So basically, the Charlotte Center minutes have gone really, really poorly for the Nuggets in the last few games I've watched of them, and I mean the non-Jokic minutes have been bad for basically time immemorial. But something I theorized was that part of the reason those lineups have gone so badly recently is that the theory behind Saric at the 5 was that he was going to be playing alongside Peyton Watson. But because Peyton Watson is basically not only replacing Aaron Gordon in the starting lineup, he's largely mirroring Jokic in the rotation. Well, so then it's Saric at the 5 without rim protection at the 4. And so I wanted to look at the numbers. And what's interesting is that the Nuggets have basically the same net rating when Saric plays with and without Watson. However, it's because the offensive and defensive ratings both either rise without Watson or drop with him by, let's call it 18 points per 100 possessions. So their defense goes from a 101 to a 119.5, and the offense has a corresponding shift. And so I think most of that is small sample size theater. We're talking under 200 possessions both directions. But I do think that this is the importance of having a higher volume of capable defensive players. And they could be any flavor. It could be a good rim protector. It could be somebody more like Watson, who's more rangy, that kind of thing, or, more perimeter guys. But the Nuggets in this iteration, and they were able to withstand it, especially they did better in the fourth quarter, that it's hard to withstand some of that. And you can't really put more heat on some of their starters. I mean, Peyton Watson got hurt and played 35 minutes. Jokic played 37. Porter played 36. You're not going to ask your front court guys in a regular season game to play more than that.
Yeah, the Nuggets, for their part, are 9-6, 2-3 in the last 2 weeks. And 2 of those 3 losses came while Nikola Jokic was on paternity leave. 4.0 net rating, totally fine. That's especially given that Jokic has missed 3 games. That's 9th in the league. 116.8 offensive rating, that's 7th. Defensive rating 112.8, that is 10th, and they project for the 3 seed. Only 48-34. I would imagine as long as Jokic stays healthy, they'll exceed that. 89% chance of the playoffs, and we are doing the next Nuggets game against the Knicks. That is at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific, 4 Hawaii time tomorrow. 5 Alaska time. And that's going to be awesome. That'll be on NBA League Pass for your League Pass subscriber. Tune in for that. So, a couple other little stats I have before we get into some of your impressions from the Denver side of this Lakers game. One of the things I usually will kind of go through a certain stat and pick out guys from certain teams where something sticks out. Peyton Watson is shooting 89.5% of his three-pointers as uncontested. And wow. Then that is a big number. That's not quite the highest in the league. We'll get to that, gentleman, later. But, and then the other thing we could talk about, too, is that Denver, that one of the things that Sport Radar puts together with their tracking camera stats is what type of coverage takes place on every pick and roll that leads directly to a shot, either by the ball handler or by a shooter who shoots within one dribble. And so the Nuggets are close to the top of the league in playing the fewest possessions as what I would consider a conservative coverage. So they have 2 categories I consider conservative. One is soft and one is ice. Nuggets only about 50% of their possessions are in those coverages. And the team they are playing tomorrow, the Knicks, is actually higher one of the highest in the league at 66%. So that shows you that the Nuggets, even though Jokic has been doing a little bit more drop this year, particularly against non-threatening guys, their numbers are not great in drop. Usually if they start taking things seriously, they will get Jokic out on the floor. That's the coverage that he likes. I think that's the coverage that Michael Malone likes, but I think they also recognize with the load that he has on him right now that that's not realistic for him to keep up all season. What did you have from the Nuggets in this one?
I mean, he had a couple in the game on Saturday, but Jokic is actually 3. Jokic's 3-point shooting, just for if people haven't been keeping an eye on this, he's only taken 48 on season because he missed a couple games. Jokic is taking a little under 4 3-pointers per 36, and he's making a cool 56% of them. He's just absolutely drilling those shots. And I think you used 3 per 36 as kind of like the barometer of, is it 3 or is it 4? As kind of like they like that's where
teams start to think 4 is what I think of as kind of the Mendoza line of guys getting guarded. But Nikola Jokic, he's always going to have gravity out there with his reputation.
I mean, he has gravity everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah. And so, but 56%, that's going to regress, but it's incredible that he's doing that. It was 3 of 7 in the win. And I thought that kind of along those lines, one of my big takeaways from the game, particularly in that torrid 37-15 third quarter, was whether it was in the half court or it was in transition, Denver was generating so many clean threes. And the Lakers, they've been 24th on defense, and they don't have a ton of great guys in their rotation. So there were a number of things that were going wrong, but also Denver moves the ball well. They have guys that understand what a good shot is within their offense. And, Jokic plays pretty much the entire third quarters, unless he's in foul trouble. And so they were just tearing up the Lakers inside the arc, outside the arc, and in the total in the game, the Nuggets only got up 32 threes, but when you make half of them 16, it still looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, that Jokic is just incredible, and the Lakers had no answers. I mean, the one answer they've had that I think has ever even remotely worked is LeBron at absolute dead bang max effort defending him with Davis on Gordon or Watson or whoever they want to put him on. And, that's obviously not a viable strategy for anything other than an elimination game or a crunch time, frankly. And even then, it hasn't looked amazing at times. So, yeah, I mean, Nikola Jokic, we're about a week away from doing awards. He will surely be my MVP unless he's struck by a bolt of lightning between now and then, and maybe even if he is for me. yeah. So, no, some of the other candidates have disappointed, but he's been better than ever. It's pretty unbelievable. And just, I'm going to keep going back to this stat because it's so incredible until it normalizes at least somewhat. So, on-court offensive rating for the Nuggets with Jokic, 126.4. Off-court, 92. Now, the defense when he's off the court, that's actually, part of the theory that I kind of, quote-unquote, liked, at least relative to previous iterations. Their strategy without Jokic was I thought they could at least defend. Now, losing Peyton Watson some from those bench groups with Gordon out has hurt this, but they have a very good defensive rating, 108.9. When he's off the floor, they're actually better defensively than with him on the floor, which is rarely the case. But then the offense, of course, completely crazy. But at least, it's getting a little bit better. They played a few full games with him. They even won one of them. So it was 74, I think, the last time we checked in at the off-court. Jokic off-floor offensive rating. Now it's up to 92. So, yeah, maybe they will actually kind of make it respectable. As of right now, of course, they are still 30 points per 100 better with Jokic on the floor than off this season, and pretty much and more of that, and they are 34 points better with him on the floor offensively.
Something I'm going to continue monitoring brought this up Friday. Michael Malone is starting each game with the intention of Saric at center as the backup unit. And then each time in both games, it's gone poorly enough that they go to DeAndre Jordan. And each time, I don't think it's been because of DeAndre Jordan either time, mostly, but they've been better. And so they were even in DeAndre's minutes at the start of the fourth when they had already built up this huge lead. I think they were up 16 at the end of the third quarter. And so then if you can hold even in the non-Jokic minutes, like you're going to beat almost anybody. You're especially going to win a game that you're already ahead in by 16. And so I think that's been the question for all these years is like, can they tread water? Generally they haven't, and we'll see if that can potentially change. Where do you want to go next?
Let's go alphabetically here to the Mavs.
Absolutely. Dallas 9-8, 4-3 since the last 15-60. I'll talk very briefly about their pretty wild at the end overtime loss to the Miami Heat on Sunday. Their net rating is still a strong 6.6. They're 7th in the league. Talked about their clutch play in that episode you and I did recently about teams that can play better. Offensive rating 4th, defensive rating 7th. The BPI projects them to win 45 games. That would be 6th, and 74% chance of making the playoffs. We've noted before that Luka Doncic is missing time now, roughly a week with the sprained wrist. We're into that time now. He's already missed a couple of games, including.
But we'll keep an eye on that though, because the sprained wrist is something that can kind of linger or be re-aggravated, or it just shooting a lot can cause it to swell up. So that I would consider that a nebulous timeline right now.
I agree. And, will the wrist issue linger? All of there are a series of different concerns, especially for someone who at times can be so heliocentric. And so I didn't pick up Heat Mavs until really late because I had other obligations. But I happened to turn it on when it was, I think, like the last couple minutes. And a couple of things stood out. There was one of them was so the lead was going a little bit back and forth late. Kyrie gets a pull up and gives the Mavericks the lead in the final minute, and then Irving. So they're still leading, and Spencer Dinwiddie took a lot of shots late in this game.
Didn't make many of them either.
Oh no, Dinwiddie misses a 3. And Jimmy Butler gets the rebound, and we're going to talk about this gentleman in a different context very soon. Kyrie Irving just hustles and knocks the ball out of Butler's hands. He didn't know anyone was there. And then in the scramble for it, Butler steps out of bounds. And so what would have been basically Heat ball down 1 with 14 seconds to go becomes Mavs ball up 1 with 14 seconds to go. Irving actually misses one of the 2 ensuing free throws. He's been a very reliable free throw shooter. And then the Mavs use their foul to give, and then eventually on the next one, Jimmy Butler breaks through and gets a dunk. From a basketball justice perspective, I think the Mavs should have lost the game then, because Derek Lively overtly fouls Jimmy Butler on the dunk. They didn't call it. I thought it was preposterous because it was in such an obvious foul, like drills him with body contact. And it's funny because the Mavs got a really hard whistle in the Denver game. But so they don't call it. So it goes to overtime, and then including a big Bam Adebayo 3, the Heat end up winning it pretty comfortably in OT. And that's what knocked the Mavs to 9-8.
Yeah. Second time the Heat have gotten a wide open dunk or layup on a sideline out of bounds, down by 2 points in the last 10 seconds of the game. So Spo's pretty good as long as he's not walking out on the floor and calling timeouts that they don't have. So I want to just call some attention, which we probably haven't enough yet, on just this ridiculous shooting season by Kyrie. Now he was 3 of 12 today. This was before that, but he was shooting over 50% from downtown coming in. 51%. Now, taking fewer threes, 5.6 as compared to 7.3 a year ago. And the usage percentage is down also. He's at 25% usage, which would be pretty close to the lowest of his career. Yeah, actually the lowest of his career by almost 3 percentage points. He was at 28.1 last year. Part of that is because they got Clay. He's going to shoot a little bit more. And it's got up some in this time since Luka has been out, but also he's just not quite able to generate as many shots as in the past. And so, but he has become ultra efficient with the ones that he is taking, probably actually just taking better shots as well to get this crazy efficiency. So he is one of the top guys in the NBA in our stat, which measures the percentage you shoot from the field better than would be expected based on the quality of shots, given the location and also how contested they are. So he's shooting 11% better field goal percentage from the field than would be expected. That is second in the NBA among high volume scorers. Kevin Durant, who has missed some time, but he's a crazy 14% so far this year. This Mavs defense, again, pretty good, even with some of their main guys missing some time. 7th on defense. Want to get into some of their style. They are forcing 13.4% of opponent possessions as isolations. That is second in the NBA. They play a more conservative type of style in the sense that they don't take a lot of risks and really try to force turnovers. But their MO is stay in front of your man, and we're not going to put 2 on the ball. We're not going to give a situation where we are necessarily going to bail you out by putting 2 on the ball and then getting into rotation, because they actually don't have great guys in terms of length to rotate and fly around beyond the play. They built it on the really good rim protection and just staying in front of guys and then showing help on isolation. So second in the NBA in forcing opponents to isolate. And then part of the reason for that is that they switch 35.4% of the time per Sport Radar on screen set result, in a shot that is second most in the NBA behind Cleveland, interestingly. And they allow only 0.844 points per chance on those switches, which is 5th in the NBA. Wanted to take a look, too, at the players who switch most often. Derek Lively is number 1 on that. And number 2 is Luka Doncic, because so many times teams will go after Luka Doncic, and so they have generally decided to switch. And then even Daniel Gafford has also been getting out on the floor more, switching 26% of the time. Derek Lively switches 39% of the time, and Luka switches 49% of the time. And then you also have like PJ Washington, Klay Thompson. Of course, those guys, if you run a screen at them, they're comfortable switching out as well. So, but I do think, though, that this Dallas defense, if you can get them out of that approach, then they are going to struggle, because they don't have many athletes other than the center. Or if you can get that center switching out on the floor and then attack elsewhere. I think teams have not done a very good job of that so far this season. But when you saw them play against the Warriors, for example, they just really struggled to deal with Steph Curry, because you can't really switch with him. They tried to do that, and Steph hit shots on Derek Lively, or they tried to put 2 on the ball, and they're just not equipped to rotate behind the play. So I think, as it has been the case, I think through most of the Jason Kidd, Sean Sweeney era, they just do a great job of executing. They don't make mistakes. They make the other team beat you, oftentimes one-on-one. And so it's good to be able to get into these Sport Radar stats and find the statistical support for that.
And I mean, it's really interesting in light of like what they forced Oklahoma City to do last year. And you think about what has changed for both of those teams if they match up again. Who knows if it is, but that like what they turned OKC into was not something that worked particularly well for the Thunder. But we're going to go to a different young team now, and that is the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, Houston is 12-6 despite a disappointing loss to Portland. They blew them out in the beginning of their set in the NBA Cup, but then second night of a back-to-back, Anthony Simons went off down the end, and the Rockets, basically their problem was they couldn't score in that game. But they're 12-6, 6-2 in their last 8. 9.9 net rating is 4th. Somehow they are 10th on offense. Offensive rebounding having much to do with that, as does transition play. They are second now on defense. They pulled ahead of Golden State. They project for the 4 seed, 46 wins, 82% chance of the playoffs. And Danny, interesting that you noted that this is around the time where you're going to get a R squared of 50% with opponent 2-point field goal percentage, because they are second in the NBA, allowing teams to shoot 48.2% from 2.
That's fantastic. And that's a big part of their success. And I referenced this piece a little bit, was the kind of where I wanted to start with the Rockets. Owen Phillips did a piece for his newsletter on centers that defend guards most frequently. And one of the players, actually number 2, who has played 150 minutes or more as of when the piece came out, is Alperen Şengün. And that is not something that Şengün had done much earlier in his career. Was last season when Ime Udoka was their coach, it was more around 17% of the time he was defending guards. That's up to almost 30% this year. And the only guy who's above him is Neemias Queta of the Celtics, who's a backup but has a different role. And that is fascinating because what they're doing, and I appreciate Owen bringing this up in the piece, was something I had thought of as well watching the Rockets, is that because you always draw parallels, is this is largely the scheme that Ime Udoka used a couple of years ago with Robert Williams. Robert Williams and Alperen Şengün are not built the same way, but the idea behind it is you can short circuit some of it, and that defending a guard, especially a low usage guard, it creates challenges for the offense, especially in a regular season setting, because they're putting them on a lower usage player. This isn't like necessarily a non-shooting forward, the Andre Robertsons of the world. And because, yeah, you can use them in actions, and we see some teams do that very well, but you kind of have to change your offense in order to do that. And in a regular season setting, teams just don't.
Yeah, and the biggest number here, too, is that 27.8% of the time he spends defending centers. So they're going to try to keep him out of the pick and roll. And this is really more, like, they're comfortable having him switch if needed, I'd say particularly late in the clock. But it's more that they're just trying to keep him out of the action and just close to the baseline.
Base
whoever's standing there, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the parallel with Rob Williams a couple of years ago when Ime Udoka coached the Celtics. Is it's not, you keep them out of the fray so they can disrupt things other places, and so that you don't put the player in a position to succeed. By the way, there were 40 players that Phillips pulled for the piece. The player who defends guards the least is Domantas Sabonis. Interesting. Yeah. And then Valanciunas is down there. He's a limited rim protector as well. But Miles Turner, who is a much better one, Rudy Gobert, those guys defend guards on the lower end as well. And so,
let me just get a couple more here from this too. Sure. There's Celtics guys, Queta, Horford, Cornette are all in the top 6. Evan Mobley, another big switch team. The Cavs are number 1 in switching pick and rolls. Ivica Zubac, who I think, because there's 2 ways this could be, right? One of them could be you're just going to guard whoever's closest to the baseline no matter what position he's playing. Or it can be that you're actually switching on the perimeter. Those are the 2 ways that you're going to be high in this metric. So there's kind of a mix of those guys, right? We were just talking about Lively and Gafford. Those guys are both in the top 10 out of these 40 centers as well. I'm interested. It doesn't look like Steven Adams is on this list. I would be interested to see how they change things with Şengün and Adams. But this is all really fascinating stuff. And certainly it seems like the best defensive teams in the league are employing whatever strategy they can generally to A, force you to go one-on-one, and B, keep your center close to the basket. If you could do those 2 things and your center is remotely decent and your perimeter talent is remotely decent, obviously it comes down to that some too, you should have a pretty good defense.
I'm trying to pull Steven Adams stats as quickly as I can. So Adams, let's see, 21% of the time on guards.
Okay. Yeah, so that's not a incredibly that's
middle.
That's like
it's middle of the road.
Yeah, above the median, which given his skill set is actually they clearly are trying to do that with him as well.
And briefly on Şengün's rim protection, it's pretty interesting how that has changed. We've talked about how he's in the action less. Şengün's contest rate has actually dropped. He went from a little bit under 40% last year to 37% this year. However, opponents made 61% of the shots he contested last year. That's down to 56.8, and that's a part of why he looks a lot better in Seth Partnow's rim protection numbers, is that the percentage on the shots he contests has improved. Also, and there are a lot of reasons that a lot of things you can praise for the Rockets for this. While the Rockets are giving up more shots in terms of frequency around the basket when Şengün is on the floor, the percentage on those shots has also dropped. That's parallel. That's dropped from 61.5 to 56. And so if you kind of work at that, you're like, wait a second, he's contesting. They're shooting 56.8 on the shots he contests. They're shooting 56.3 on the ones he doesn't contest, or overall. That means they're shooting better on the ones that he doesn't contest. We brought this up a little bit last week. That is unusual, but it's more unusual for somebody who's doing as well in the rim protection metrics as Şengün is, but it's not unprecedented. For example, Derek Lively, who's around the same area in the like the numbers, he has the same split. It's generally like you could see it over a small sample or something else, but that isn't true. It's just kind of to think about it. That isn't true for a lot of the players in this area, like for Daniel Gafford or Walker Kessler. Like those guys, teams shoot way worse on the shots they contest versus the ones that they don't.
Yeah, and Ben Thompson is also maybe one of the reasons why teams shoot poorly on the shots that Alperen Şengün does not contest, because he is one of the top rim protecting non-centers. And that's, I mean, Ben Thompson is in theory, was drafted almost as a point guard. He's small forward size at best. Usually that's going to be a power forward. But he is contesting 15.3% of attempts. That is not a huge number, right? Like your average power forward is usually going to be in the high teens. Average center is going to be in the low 30s in terms of percentage of shots they contest. And Ben Thompson, he contests that 15.3% of attempts. But the reason he's so high in our numbers is opponents are making only 39% of those shots. Again, not a ton of contests there for him on the season yet, but certainly he is someone who makes an impact on an opponent shooting around the basket if he's there.
He does. And so Houston, as we mentioned, the 2-point defense has been a huge part of their success. They're number 2 in 2-point percentage, and they're number 3 overall in defensive rating. And they're number 3 in defense, despite like they're good in some of the other measures. They're forcing turnovers at the 6th highest rate. They're a good defensive rebounding team, great in certain moments, especially when they can have their bigs available. But it is really impressive, and so we'll see where that goes. And I mean, if their defense is top 5 at the end of the year, well, then their pathway to being not only a playoff team, but like a higher seed, even if their offense progresses, which I expect it to, is still very clear. Like teams that are top 5 defense are generally going to make it there. And so we'll transition to Golden State, where the Warriors are 12-4, 4-2 since the last 15-60, though they did fall to the Spurs on Saturday. Their net rating is 5th in the NBA, plus 7.5. They're doing that mostly through their defense, which is 3rd, but they are 13th on offense. And BPI is very optimistic on the Warriors. 51 wins would be the 2 seed in the West, and I believe it's the 2 seed by a real margin. Yeah, okay. Well, they're right now, BPI's projections have them finishing almost 4 games clear of the Nuggets.
Yeah, there isn't necessarily anyone in the West that you're terrified of. They have played pretty well so far, but they are really going to miss DeAnthony Melton, particularly with some of the struggles that Brandon Podziemski has had. The biggest thing to me about losing Melton is they're not going to force as many turnovers anymore. I thought that they had one of the better turnover forcing groups that you could get to. The combination of him, Kyle Anderson, who's kind of been around the fringes of the rotation, in part due to these neck spasms that I think have been hindering his effectiveness. But, Draymond isn't really a huge steals guy anymore. Some of their other main guys, like Wiggins, is a very good positional defender. Kuminga's not really going to get many steals. So Melton was one of the guys who really could cause some havoc behind the play. And he only played 6 games, but they did force 4.8 percentage points more in terms of turnover rate in his limited minutes. So part of my theory on this group being a top 5 defense over the course of the season was that they were going to force a lot of turnovers, especially if Anderson is now going to be minimized as well. They're probably not going to do as much. That Steph Curry used to be a guy who'd force a lot of steals. Now he doesn't do that anymore either. And then Brandon Podziemski and his numbers, Danny, are pretty miserable right now. He is actually shooting better this year from 2 than he was the season ago, but he's only shooting 19% from 3. And Draymond Green had a long discussion of how he's putting all this pressure on himself to make shots. I thought Tim Kawakami and Anthony Slater talked about it well on the new Warriors Plus Minus, saying that, he kind of had this idea. Maybe the front office had this idea. Joe Lacob saying he's a future All-Star. He famously is, he's untouchable in the Larry Markkinen talks. Again, that's all lip service stuff. But Draymond he blamed the media. I mean, he could blame, the fact that guys want to get rich as well, too. Like, as Tim noted, Brandon Podziemski, if he's going to make $30 million a year, like, he's got to actually do more on ball. Like, yeah, the Warriors love him for all this little stuff that he does, like taking charges and rebounding and, hitting the occasional open shot and running the offense a little bit. But like, that's not what really is going to get you paid. And, they have a lot of depth at shooting guard. So he apparently has been putting a lot of pressure on himself as a shooter. He's tried to add a jump shot that he didn't really have, like a 2-point jump shot. He used to just shoot these super high floaters last year, and that's been a work in progress for him. But it really has been just the 3-point shooting for him where he struggled. And the other thing, too, is he hasn't been as good on the boards as he was last year. So, I mean, he's got to get back to doing the good things that he was doing, get himself back on the floor, and then worry about the shooting, I think is kind of what everyone is thinking there. These numbers with Draymond Green at center versus power forward, I thought were pretty interesting, because that's been another storyline with the Warriors this year. Are they going to play Draymond at center? Are they going to play him at power forward? I think in the absence of Melton, they probably need to play him more at center so that they can then play Kuminga and Wiggins together. Melton was one of their on-ball defenders who could also do something on offense. They don't have like that many of those guys. No. And so now they're gonna need to play Draymond at center more, so they can also play Kuminga and Wiggins, so they have 2 guys who can guard the ball. Anything that sticks out to you about these Draymond at center versus power forward numbers?
I think it's pretty fascinating that the Warriors' offensive rating improves when Draymond moves from the 5 to the 4. Normally, you would expect that to be the opposite. And maybe it's small sample size. Maybe it's the minutes he's playing with Curry versus not like that. I don't know how those splits are. But to go, and then they're both good, going from a 120.7 to a 122. That's not a huge shift, but it is notable.
Well, and they're shooting ridiculously well when he's at center, 44%. A lot of that is probably Hield and Steph together. So, and this is about equal amount of time with him playing center and power forward. But they're still better, as you mentioned, with him at power forward. And that's even with shooting a little bit worse from 3, although it's still spectacularly over 40% as a team. On defense, when he plays power forward, they never turn teams over. Right? They don't really play that aggressively. Some of their starting lineups, too, have just, without Melton, Lindy Waters, who's been starting for them, he's kind of getting the Keith Bogans, but he's like passable on defense. They could shoot. They don't want to put Buddy Hield in that role yet. Podziemski is struggling, so they've gone to Lindy Waters, but they just really don't have a ton of athleticism. So they're playing a much more conservative style now. They used to switch so much. That's obviously, they're really the first team that made that famous. But now they're much different. They actually switch in the bottom 10 of the league so far this year. They play more conservative style. Draymond does far less, switching on the perimeter than he used to. Jackson Davis isn't really going to do that either. Now, they may do a little bit more aggressive coverages at times rather than just a soft coverage or a drop, but they are not actively switching. But for all these things, you can take a few things away. They are going to miss Melton. The numbers with Steph Curry and Draymond on the floor are still back to being elite, as they were when they won in 22, and as they were, of course, throughout the dynasty run.
Yeah, it's a almost plus 15 net rating when Stephen Curry is on the floor, and that is that is completely ridiculous. And it's not Jokic-esque, but the Warriors offense is significantly worse without Stephen Curry on the floor. That has been the case, I believe, every single season. Even some of the KD years, it was still, it just never quite materialized.
No, that's true. And so, yeah, they're 13.4 points, 100 worse with Steph off the floor, but they still actually are positive despite a 107 offensive rating because they defend like crazy. 104 defensive rating with Steph off the floor. So we'll see how long that lasts. I mean, that's a 104 defensive rating in this day and age is pretty tough to sustain. So they do have a lot of depth. They took a hit with the loss of Melton, but they also still can't score without Steph on the floor. Andrew Wiggins has been playing a lot better too. He didn't play as well in that Spurs loss, but he had some massive games before that. So Golden State's in pretty good position right now. We'll see if they can withstand a Steph injury as well as they did the last time where Steph rests. But they had that big road trip without him, got him back, and he's having another very, very good year. Where are we going next here?
To the team that beat the Warriors on Saturday, San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah, the San Antonio Spurs are 9-8.
Yes, they are.
5-2 in their last 7. They still have a negative net rating, negative 0.7. That's 16th. 21st on offense, which is actually a lot better than I thought they would be, honestly. And 13th on defense. They project for 39 wins. That would be the over on a line that I thought was very speculative. And they have done it without Victor Wembanyama. They won 2 games without him last week. One was over the Jazz and a dramatic win, but still. So they're still projected for the 11th seed, but they could be in the mix here. 15% chance of making the playoffs. And yeah, we're gonna watch. We're gonna do Spurs Jazz, right? It's our last chance to discuss those two teams playing one another already on November 26th.
These are non-divisional opponents, and they're playing 4 times in 1 month. Not a calendar month, but 4 times within a 30-day span. And I mean, I hate this from a competitive balance standpoint. There have been absences for each team during it, but just, how it's going to go. But for San Antonio, they've won 3 straight and 5 of their last 7. The only 2 losses in that stretch, they lost to the Lakers, and then they lost at the Mavericks without Victor Wembanyama. It is fair to say that all 5 of San Antonio's wins have been at home, and 2 of them were against soft opponents. But beating the healthy Kings, beating the Thunder, and beating the Warriors, that happening in a relatively tight succession for a pretty young team, a team that's doing well, very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, even it was a close loss as well in the NBA Cup to the Lakers.
Yeah,
at home. And then, the Dallas loss, so it wasn't close, but that was without Victor. Victor, I thought it was very interesting to note that despite the fact that I see him as one of the most impossible guys to isolate against in the NBA, that he plays what I would consider a soft pick and roll coverage 76.6% of the time. So that's either ice or what is called soft. I guess I should call it a conservative coverage, where he's hanging back towards the rim. And, of course, that's working pretty well if you look at their opponent 2-point percentage. And then Chris Paul has gotten his shot making back. A lot of that has been from 3 so far, but he really struggled to get his shot off to make his shot last year in Golden State, where he had, I believe, the least efficient year of his career, certainly relative to league average. But he has actually made 10.1% more shots than the quality of his shots would indicate. So our numbers expect him to only make 49% of his shots, field goal percentage, but he's actually at 59%. So he's not taking very difficult shots, particularly from 2, but he has made them so far this season. What else have you seen from Chris this year?
I wanted to keep an eye this season on how San Antonio's overall turnover rate would change, because they added Chris Paul, and particularly when it looked like they were going to have either CP3 or Trey Jones on the floor, because Trey Jones doesn't turn the ball over a ton either. Unfortunately, Trey missed the start of the year, so it's not just a full sample with those 2 guys playing point guard. And this actually got me onto a bigger thing, which I hadn't quite noticed. So, and some of this is the noise of an early season. So San Antonio last year turned the ball over on 15% of their possessions. That was the 5th worst proportion in the league. And it was a little better when Trey Jones was on the floor. This year, their turnover rate is up. They're up from 15 to 15.8, but that is 22nd as opposed to 26th because it has been a way higher turnover environment, especially for the teams at the bottom of the list. So overall league average so far, and I'm not comparing this to this portion of last year, I'm comparing it to the entirety of last season. Last year, teams turned the ball over on 13.7% of their possessions, but the league's worst teams were was 15.6. This year, the league average is up a full percent to 14.7, but the worst teams in the league over this smaller sample, the Jazz are at 18-1, the Blazers are at 17-6. So we're way beyond that. But again, this should normalize it at least partially over the course of time.
All right, anything else on these guys?
Just briefly, most of these turnovers aren't Chris Paul's. His turnover usage is far, far below what you would expect for somebody who has the ball in his hands as much. Instead, it is basically everybody else on the team that's turning it over at a high rate. Victor Wembanyama has the highest turnover usage. So this is using the total usage stat. He has the highest turnover usage for a big man with over 200 minutes played, and it's actually 10th highest in the league. That most of those guys are guards that have the ball in his hands a lot. It's something to keep an eye on. And there are centers who kind of per minute are in that range, but haven't played as many minutes like Steven Adams. But most of those guys, the reason they have those high turnover rates is actually because they get called for illegal screens or some other foul. It's not, they turn it over in the way that Victor Wembanyama does. I expect that. We've talked about the shooting, which has already improved a lot since the beginning of the year, or in terms of percentages, that some of these are sins of commission that should improve with development and somewhat maybe with more accountability and with better teammates. Nate, you got your voice, your thing sounds a lot hollow now. I don't know what happened. Yeah. Let's see. Thoughts on basically removing conferences for playoffs in season history. So first of all, I expect that to improve, even though the West is markedly better than the East so far. I think that it's just it kind of has to, but I think there are a couple of real things here. So one is in a just basketball world, the West, it's kind of unfair to have this in the West, and that matters, but it doesn't actually matter in terms of changing things, because doesn't have anything to do with it. And as Nate and I talked about, I think briefly last week, it would require, I believe it's 7 or 8 of the East lead executives, the governors, to approve a change like that to go to top 16. And that's not going to happen because you're reducing your expected revenue. You're reducing all this stuff. So we can talk about what it should be. And I actually think that what it should be is maybe you have an out for extreme cases where it's if it's 10 games different or something like that. But for television reasons, for a lot of things, going to a top 16, it's maybe better from a basketball perspective, but it creates all of these other challenges that when you're an entertainment product might not be worth it.
All right, I'm back. How do I sound?
Still sounds a little weird on the podcast. So I don't know if something's going on.
Let me see where I'm at here. 1 sec. Oh yeah. All right. How's that? Better?
There you go.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's It is perfect now. This is the good mic. I spent a lot of money on this thing. Hopefully it can actually work. All right, let's get to our next team here, and that will be the LA Clippers. The Clippers are 11-7, 5-3 since we last checked in on them. At first, it seemed like they would never win at the Intuit Dome. Then they started playing extremely well there. They are 11th in net rating, plus 2.9. Offense is 24th, but defense is 5th. In Ty Lue and Ivica Zubac, we trust. Projected record is 4th in the West, 46 wins, 81% chance of the playoffs. And I'll just throw a few things out here about their defense. And then we can talk a little bit more about just some interesting facts about these guys offensively. One thing I thought is that opponents are really struggling opponent big men, are really struggling against the Clippers. And I don't need to get into the exact. Oh yeah, here we go. I got it in front of me. So opponent bigs are scoring at the worst rate in the league against the Clippers. They are scoring only 0.98 points per chance, which
wow,
when you consider that bigs are generally pretty efficient. It's that is surprising. So I figured that was the Zubac effect. I think it probably is, but again, we're seeing these numbers where Zubac is a really good defender, but the defensive rating with Nick Batum on the floor is a 96.7, with Kevin Porter Jr., not necessarily something that he's doing, but he is part of the bench units, 99. And Chris Dunn, 100.5. Dunn has been elevated to the starting lineup now. They've moved Terrence Mann, he of the 3-year extension, to a bench role. So, I mean, some of these bench numbers, Dunn has an 11.8 net rating, Batum 10.1, and that's really, again, pretty much all on the defensive end that they're managing to do that. So I mean, all these bench guys look pretty good. Zubac, his numbers are still very good when he's on the floor, though. 107.3 defensive rating when he is on the floor. So they've got these. They haven't really played much in terms of backup center. Like Mo Bamba just got healthy. He's only played 71 minutes so far on the year, and Kai Jones only played 88. So it really has been those Batum at center lineups off the bench that have totally slayed defensively. A couple other interesting numbers for the Clippers. They do not switch very often. They do it more against the Warriors, whom they've beaten twice, forcing a lot of turnovers. But they only switch 20.5% of the time on screens, which is 21st in the NBA. But despite the fact that they don't switch that much, they only allow 37.4 drives per game, which is 5th best in the league. So you'd think one way you avoid driving is you switch, you don't give up that advantage. But if you're setting a screen, it should be easier to at least get into the paint, but they are still stopping those pretty well. Harden is really their only guy who switches a lot. James Harden switches 52.6% of the time that he is targeted. And then also if they go at Batum will switch as well, 48.4%. Those are the main guys. Zubac never switches. He only switches 7.8% of the time. So when he's in there, they are successfully walling off the paint, keeping him close to the basket. Again, he was high on that list from Owen Phillips of centers who are not guarding the center as often. But I mean, it's kind of funny that, he's not guarding the center. That means he actually stays close to the basket. Like, yeah, that's actually right. Because when the center runs up to set a screen, they have someone else go guard him. Harden, as I mentioned, is the only guy who switches a lot, and he gets blown by a lot. So he is 3rd in the NBA in blow by percentage on drives. 32.1% of the time he faces a drive, he gets blown by. And some of these numbers are Surprising, though, that even when he gets blown by, opponents are only getting about 1 point per chance. So
Well,
that
Nate,
means that the
I
defense
think that
behind him is really good.
connects with what you just talked about.
Yeah, that they're
Yeah,
keeping Zubats closer to the rim. And, so Harden is allowing a lot of drives. They don't allow many as a team. But, yeah, that's exactly right. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, this is our first chance to look at some of these numbers again with Sport Radar. And, the numbers, just the average points per chance on when there is a blow by are actually not as high as you would expect. Now, a lot of these blow bys might happen, on a closeout or something where it's part of the scheme. And also, quite frankly, they have a pretty good idea at this point in his career that James Harden might get blown by. So they can kind of load to him and maybe it gets the defense in rotation, but the way these are scored is just where it's either a shot on the drive or a direct pass to another shot. So maybe it's hurting the defense later, but obviously the overall numbers are quite fine.
One that surprises me on this list is Chris Paul. I mean, Chris Paul he's older now, but being blown by, that's not the number that surprised me. It's that Victor Wembanyama is the center on this team, and I'd be interested in what the sample is. But when Chris Paul gets blown by, which has happened 23 times so far, the Spurs are giving up a 1.4, basically 1.4 points per possession. So that's significantly worse than the Clippers are when you consider what Victor Wembanyama is doing on the floor. But it might be sample stuff. It might be something else.
I think it is, yeah.
But it's surprising. You would have expected that maybe that his number would be better on that, and that maybe somebody like, I don't know, Scoot Henderson potentially, or Tyrese Halliburton has Miles Turner. So it is. I just was surprised by that duality.
Yeah, and we're getting more familiar with these numbers as well. I will say in a lot of these categories, I'm surprised at how small the sample size is. Now, maybe it just is bigger by the end of the year. We're only a month or so into the season right now. So we'll check in as we grow more familiar with all these numbers, and hopefully we can, some of them may be more useful than others. So we'll kind of go through that process together of trying to figure out which numbers those are. What's next?
The Oklahoma City Thunder.
Yeah, the Thunder, 12-4, tied atop the conference with Golden State, 4-2 since we last checked in on them. They had a couple of rough losses in that period. They're second in net rating in the whole NBA at 12.0. Ninth on offense. That has steadily been rising since the start of the season when they couldn't hit a three. Still first on defense. They're not under 100 anymore. They're 103.4. They've lost their rim protection, at least for a little while, until they got Hartenstein back. He had a nice debut in his first game back, getting a lot of rebounds, and they are running more through him at the elbows. We'll talk more about that at a later point. They project for 55 wins, which would be the 1 seed, and they will be making the playoffs according to BPI. And now Ousmane Dieng, who had been their center, I said this about the Charlotte Hornets too, and the sad news that Grant Williams has been lost for the year with the torn ACL. If someone asks you to be the Thunder center, don't accept, because you're going to get hurt immediately. Same thing with Charlotte. So Dieng is out with that fractured right ring finger. Dieng, interestingly enough, 89% of his threes had been uncontested. Wow. I think he's. Did they pick up his fourth year option? They did, huh?
They did.
Yeah, I think that's just because the Thunder, they just like to be nice guys. They're not going to antagonize an agent or a player for that. They want to maintain their development culture, even though I certainly would have considered doing that.
Well, so, and the money, their money isn't as tight in the 25-26 season as it will be in the 26-27 season. I think in that sort of a circumstance, the equivalent of a Dieng decision might go the other way.
All right, so let's get into it here with more of these sexy stats on the Thunder defense.
Something I wanted to look at with, thankfully, Isaiah Hartenstein is back, though I'm pissed off that they have a 5-day gap right after his debut. So he's only played once. I was going to watch the next game, and I didn't realize that there wasn't one until Monday. The Thunder are, I brought up before that this is kind of when that R squared is getting to 0.5 with 2-point field goal percentage. The Thunder are the stingiest in that specific stat. Opponents are only making 47.9% of their twos. And the Thunder are also giving up the second fewest 2-point attempts per 100 possessions. The Hawks are the only team that concedes fewer. Now, that isn't necessarily a good, or it depends where those shots are coming from, whether that is a good or bad thing, because you have to give shots somewhere. And briefly on their defense, I got fixated last year because the Raptors 2 years ago finished first in offensive and defensive turnover percentage. The Thunder almost did it last year, but then they didn't. They currently lead the league again in both of those stats. They are number one in offensive turnover rate, and they are number one in defensive. I'll track that a lot more closely once we're closer to the end of the season. And then what I really wanted to focus on, I have two big threats, but the main one is, how have the Thunder defended? They've defended really well in the non-Chet Holmgren, non-Hartenstein minutes, of which there were many, especially in that stretch when Holmgren was out and Hartenstein hadn't yet returned. And so 108.4 defensive rating. And when you consider just kind of who they have, because remember, Jalen Williams has also been out. So like all of your centers are unavailable. And I'm like, well, what is that group doing well? And the main thing they're doing well is that they are forcing a ton of turnovers. 20.8% of opponent possessions when they face those Thunder groups are turnovers. That is
it's insane. It's insane what they're doing to opposing teams. And to build on that stat, when you look at the drives that they face, they're allowing the 6th fewest drives per game, which is pretty amazing considering, again, how small they've been. The lowest points per possession, that's even crazier, right? Because on those drives, you think, all right, you get past the first guy. Yeah, it's hard to do that, but then where's the rim protection? Well, the way that they're holding down that opponent point per possession on drives, which is 0.875 points per chance on drives right now, is they're forcing turnovers on 12% of opponent drives. So 12% of the time, if you try to put it down and get to the basket against this Thunder team, you're going to turn it over.
And that connects with some of the other things that stand out about the Thunder defense. So now what you just said, that's the full sample. And then I'm going back to the non-Chet, non-Hartenstein.
Yeah.
They're excellent in transition defense. Super low opponent transition frequency and a low transition offensive rating. We'll see if that can carry over the course of the whole season. And you brought up how they have all these turnovers, and so that helps the points per possession on drives. Those minutes, the Thunder are also only giving up a 60% opponent field goal percentage at the rim. That would be if you build each team out to the full season, that would be third in the NBA behind the Thunder full season and the Rockets, just ahead of the Cleveland Cavaliers. They have been a little unlucky on opponent threes, but opponents are missing a ton of long twos, so those I think would get close to bouncing out. So forcing a ton of turnovers, not giving up anything in transition, that is really, really driving their success in those minutes, despite not having rim protection in any way, shape, or form. Oh, yeah. And by the way, in those lines, I brought up how good their defense has been. No Chet, no Hartenstein, plus 8.6 net rating in almost 900 possessions already this season.
Let me give you some individual stats to back up what you're talking about of the contest percentages and restricted area field goal percentages allowed at the basket by non-bigs for the Thunder. Alex Caruso contesting 17.6%. That's, again, a power forward-like number. 46% shooting allowed at the rim. Jalen Williams, 16% contest, 48% allowed at the rim. Cason Wallace, a 6'2 guard, or thereabouts, contesting 12%, pretty good for a point guard, allowing 46% shooting at the rim. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 59% shooting allowed at the rim. That's very good still for a guard, even if it's lower than some of these other dudes. So it's really not, and on some of these plays, multiple guys are contesting it as well. So, but those are, you just don't see numbers below 55% for a non-big like that. That just doesn't exist.
The last brief thing I wanted to discuss with the Thunder is I wondered what Jalen Williams' role within the offense was going to do now that Josh Giddey is in Chicago. It has increased materially. 34.4 total usage last year. That's up to 38.7. And that's coming from a mix of scoring and playmaking. Each of those is up a percent or two. And his time of possession up to almost 26% of their, I think that's front court time. And when you add to your offensive role, generally that leads to a decrease in efficiency on your shots. That has been true for Williams, gone from 62% true shooting to 60%, but that's completely understandable when you go for that kind of usage. And something I want to track is that Williams' free throw attempts per 36 has actually dropped. It hasn't dropped massively, but when you think that you have the ball in your hands more, that could potentially lead to more opportunities. But the other thing that I'm really interested in, and again, small sample size, all that type of stuff. Last year, when Jalen Williams was on the floor and Shea was off, and this is honestly pretty close, the numbers here, when Giddey was off too, or when Giddey was on with Jalen Williams, Thunder had about a 112 offensive rating, a little bit worse than that when Giddey was off too. That is down to a 103.1. When Jalen Williams is on the floor and Shea is off. There's a lot of small sample size theater, all the type of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of Alex Caruso probably in those minutes too.
Yeah, but that's something I want to watch because Williams' individual scoring numbers have been good. We talked about his increased role, but can the Thunder be viable offensively in those minutes? And you think about the challenges that they've had defensively. They haven't been able to have a center on the floor because they've had no centers. Then they had some limited offensive players playing in these groups, but that's something I want to watch.
Yeah, one other note that I had here as well is that opponents post up against the Thunder for 8.1% of chances, and that is number one by quite a bit. So that's actually, again, that is a shot being finished out of a post up or a pass out of the post leading directly to a shot. And so that just is an indicator that they've been kind of small and opponents have tried to play mismatch basketball against them, obviously, given their overall defensive numbers. It has not worked. Let's talk about the Grizz.
The Memphis Grizzlies are 10-7, a respectable 4-3 considering their absences since the last 1560. They're a remarkable 6th in net rating, +7. They're one of the other teams that's top 10 in offense and defense. They're actually 6th in both of those, and appropriately, they're also projected to be 6th in the West using BPI, 73% chance of making the playoffs. Good news is that Ja Morant is at least being listed as questionable now. Listed questionable as we're recording this for their game Monday against the Blazers with that posterior hip subluxation. So I'm hopeful he'll be back soon. Whether soon is now, we'll have to find out.
When will then be now? Soon. I'm just really happy about that because I was concerned that there could be like some severe labral damage and that could be something he's going to require surgery for. Now, can he string together just 10 games even? That would be great. Grizz are really fast. I mean, they're top 6, but they are 6. They are not top 6 and not 6 in both offense and defense, but they are number 1 in the percentage of the time across their team in what I would call was called soft coverage again. So it's basically a drop coverage. They differentiate between soft and ice because ice takes place on the side. It's a pretty similar concept that the big is staying close. Now, when you employ Zach Edey, that's not a huge surprise. But also Jay Huff is someone who plays a soft coverage, according to Sport Radar, a ton of the time. Brandon Clark is doing that as well. And it's interesting that, they're 6th in defense. Jaren Jackson Jr., the season that he was Defensive Player of the Year in 23, he had one of the greatest rim protecting season that we've ever seen. Dan, you remember those stats?
Oh, it was. I don't remember them off the cuff, but they were nuts.
Well, I had him in the document here.
I hadn't seen that. I was looking at a diffdifferent part of the document.
I was trying to prop you there to take you guys behind the curtain.
I mean, only 47% opponents shooting on his contests, but a 37% contest percentage. That's really high. And so the points saved per 100 was 5.6, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and he was playing a lot of power forward at that point, right? And the other thing that made him so crazy high. 5.6 points saved per 100 possessions per our stats back in 23 was that opponents shot 54% at the rim with him in the game. That's an incredibly low number. I mean, that's like you would see that every once in a while with like Jazz opponents when Rudy Gobert was at his absolute height. So here are the numbers now. He's gone from 5.6 points saved per 100. And again, like this, he was playing, I think, pretty similar defensive role in terms of like having a center next to him or not. Because they had Steven Adams for half of that year too. So he's gone from 5.6 points saved from 100 down to 1.0. That is 149th among all players who have played more than 300 defensive possessions. So the component numbers of that, 37% contest percentage down to 18.6, which is kind of average-ish for a power forward. And opponents are shooting 59%. So it's not even that he is less around the basket. It's that even when he is there, opponents are scoring much better against him. You know, he is playing next to E, so it's a little excusable that contest percentage is a little bit lower. But still, like it shouldn't be that different with the Zach Edey or Steven Adams. So yeah, just a massive decline. But the team numbers are not really that much worse than they were before. Like they are still very good when he's out there.
Plus 9.5 net rating is very good. I mean, that's if you were to look at like kind of individual players, that's up there as one of the better ones that you'll see. And they're a completely respectable, in my opinion, plus 2.2 with Jackson on the bench. And particularly when you consider how many guys the Grizzlies have had out, and they've had put pressure on their starting lineup. And then that puts pressure on your bench lineups too, with Smart and Ja and Bane and Vince Williams all missing significant time this year. So I think that plus 2.2 is really good as well.
Yeah, and then on defense, 102.3 defensive rating with Jackson on, 113.7, still respectable with him off. And then also playing he and Brandon Clark together. You know, I kind of wondered, like, Brandon Clark doesn't look that good when I watch him, but the numbers with he and Jackson have always been great, even before the Achilles tear, and they're still really good. They played about a quarter of their possessions overall with those two on the floor together. 14.8 net rating, 100.3 defensive rating, which of course would be 3 points better than the league-leading Thunder. And now opponents are shooting 33.8% from three. That's, a little low, but nothing crazy. That could make up a couple points of the defensive rating. They are getting absolutely every defensive rebound. Well, opponents are only getting 23% of offensive rebounds against those units. And again, opponents are shooting only 58% at the rim with Jackson on. So that is a very, very low number. I think there's going to be a larger discussion that we're going to need to have very soon of what is this Grizzly team going to be. And I hope that with Ja Morant coming back and the numbers with Ja on are double-digit positive net rating when he has actually been able to play this year. They've had some pretty big blowouts of teams that suck like that when they had in Portland. But, they took care of the Bulls the other night. And interestingly, Scottie Pippen Jr. had, I'm just going to try to get the stats off the top of my head. It was like the first 25, 7-7 game on 88% shooting or more since his father did it in the same building, which is, that was quite cherry picked, but still was a pretty cool story. He thought that was really cool.
Thaddeus Young approves, but it's cool with the parallel.
But we're gonna have to talk about like how much of a threat these guys are really gonna be, because given the injuries that they've had, to be top 6 in offense and defense, I really want to talk about what they're doing offensively too. With Thomas Isalo, whose name I probably just butchered, coming over from Paris last year. And, like for them to be, like with as little as Ja Morant has played, for them to be 6 in offense, that is very, very impressive. So they still project only for the 45 wins, but I want to really start thinking about how good these guys can be. And hopefully we'll get enough of a sample of Ja in this next stint to really start thinking about it. But I felt one of my big takeaways, like the first 2-3 days of the season, was, man, the Grizz got a lot of guys. Like, I think they might be back, and they've had some ups and downs. They've had the injuries, but like these numbers are very good so far.
And when you don't know if you get storms in the beginning that you're going to have clear skies after that, but they've weathered this pretty well, and I think that bodes well. Another team that has unfortunately had to weather some storms and hasn't been as successful in certain ways is the Phoenix Suns. They are 9-7 on the season, but 1-5 since the last 15-60. They've of course had high profile injuries to KD and Bradley Beal. They're now -3 in net rating. That's 19th in the NBA, 16th on defense, or 16th on offense, 19th on defense. BPI projects them to win 44. They're in this like giant group of teams that are around 44, 45 wins. And that would be the 8 seed so far. And we're going to take the Suns. We're going to be a little faster on them because I really hope we have the opportunity to do a breakdown of their NBA Cup game against the Lakers on Tuesday, because hopefully Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant will both be back. It's kind of looking that way. We saw some quotes from the coaching staff over the weekend. It's kind of looking that direction. And because that game has some big implications, if the Suns can win it, then they actually, I would argue, control their own destiny in the group. And if the Lakers win it, then they have firm control. And the other reason why I would like to do that game is just, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later with a different team, but particularly since the last 15-60, the sample just isn't particularly useful. Like, we just haven't learned much about the Suns because they haven't had enough of their dudes.
Yeah, so maybe a small takeaway that we can provide for them is taking a look at the style that they are playing under Mike Budenholzer. So you can look at the team level, but Sportradar also provides these stats for just individual players. I kind of like to just look at the center, because I think the center, you're doing a lot of switching on the perimeter. Like, that doesn't necessarily determine your style. But I thought it was noteworthy here that the number of times the guys have been in soft coverage, I mentioned. So here are your top 7 guys. Jay Huff is actually number 1, 83% of the time. Bam Adebayo, that'll be something to talk about with the Heat, is number 2 in the soft coverage. So he is doing no switching this year. Wembanyama is 3. We talked about him already. And then you got 2 Suns centers at 4 and 7, Yusuf Nurkic and Mason Plumlee. Nurkic, 76% of the time, Plumlee, 73% of the time, playing a soft coverage. So again, Nurkic has always been more of a drop coverage guy. He's got some mobility. Plumlee, actually, you would see out on the floor probably more, particularly in his Denver days. He was lauded, perhaps I would say, unjustifiably, for having a lot of mobility and being good at that coverage. But I think Mike Budenholzer is clearly going to a very conservative look there. Royce O'Neal leads the NBA in getting blown by on the perimeter, although the Suns, like with the Clippers with Harden, haven't really allowed too many points per chance on those plays. And then Kevin Durant, I mentioned before, I want to reiterate it here. Per our numbers, he's shooting 14% better than expected so far this season. He also is playing 39 minutes a game. They had a bunch of close games. He has still by far the best net rating on the team at plus 2.7. Slightly troubling, even though they were doing so well in the clutch when he was out there, that even with their best guy, and I would say he certainly this year has been their best guy, not Booker, that he only had a 2.7 net rating. So the Suns are kind of like the anti-Grizz in some ways, where they had this sexy record, then they have the injuries, but hopefully we'll get a chance to see them against the Lakers, and hopefully the referees will make sure in the NBA Cup that all timeouts are granted when a team actually has possession of the ball this time.
Yeah, that was last year. Let's go from there to the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, I suppose we can. When the hell did they win these 4 games? They're 4-12. They're actually 2-5 since we last checked in on them. They beat the Knicks, actually. That can answer my own question. They got hot from 3 and beat the Knicks, who will be the Nuggets foil on the NBA Strategy stream tomorrow at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific, 4 Hawaiian time. The Jazz actually also are not even quite at the bottom in net rating either. They're 27th in net rating, negative 8.7. They're competitive as well against the Spurs. Probably should have won that game. They're 26th on offense, 26th on defense. They project for the number 15 seed in the West with 26 wins. Walker Kessler did come back after a 6-game absence with that right hip bursitis. David Locke was tracking these stats that the Knicks really struggled to score, shot terribly when he was on the floor, and shot great when he was off the floor, but he was on the floor often enough for them to get that victory. And then these Lauri Markkanen stats, they are semi-respectable offensively, 38th percentile, 112 when he's on, but when he is off, 106.6. I mean, they really just don't have any other premium offensive players. The defense is pretty rough regardless.
Well, and on that point, I was interested in the Markkanen off minutes. If we're just taking that part of the sample, well, how big is Colin Sexton's presence on their offensive rating? And we're splitting, we're cutting thinner here. But the Jazz have basically the same offensive rating with Sexton on and off the floor in the non-Markkanen minutes. I did not expect that, but we'll see if that can continue. And I think for the purposes of the Jazz, when it comes to tanking, the negative 7.3 net rating with Markkanen on the floor may actually be more important than the negative 13 off, because they might be able to lose enough with Markkanen playing, and maybe Walker Kessler being back, maybe some of that stuff shifts around. They did beat the Knicks on Saturday. Is that maybe they don't have to sit him as much in order to get to where they want to be. They're 2-5 since last 15-60, because I think that would be good for some of their young guys, for Keontae George, for Kessler himself to have that. And I think I was watching one of the myriad Jazz Spurs games. I ended up watching the Jazz a fair amount, and I was just thinking about how little Cody Williams has the ball and how little he does. And at that point, one of the games I was watching, he was still starting, which he's only started 7 to 16 games now. And so over the full season, Cody Williams has played just under 300 minutes, and he has a usage rate of 11.5. That's the Basketball Reference version of the stat, with 19 assists. And so I'm like, okay, how often does that happen? And over the last 10 full seasons, there have been 113 player seasons with over 1,000 minutes played, and which Williams is not at, but if he plays a reasonable proportion,
he's going to get there, because they don't have any more of these things called forwards on the team other than him now that Taylor Hendricks went down.
And so only 113 player seasons over the last decade with 1,000 minutes played or more and a usage rate under 12. And if you narrow that to under 11.5 or under, that goes to 79 player seasons. So that means we're talking about 8 guys a year that play that many minutes and have that small role. Notably, that group of players they're diverse in terms of positioning. They're bigs, they're smalls, like Caruso's been in that group. There's PJ Tucker 5 times in that, where he's played over 1,000 minutes, had a usage rate under 12. And then most centers on the Knicks. That's just I've made that joke a lot for Tibbs. And when you look at kind of, well, what roles has Cody Williams had within the Jazz offense? He's not touching the ball a lot. It hasn't been much running pick and roll. He's run 20 pick and rolls in total. He's 10 of those he took a shot. 10 of those he passed. They haven't gone particularly well, especially the 0.2 on the pick and roll scoring opportunities for him. And something that I think will really improve for Williams, in part because it can't really do worse, is that 2/3 of Cody Williams, the most frequent play type per synergy that he has, are spot ups. 2/3 of those have been no dribble jumpers, and he's 5 of 35 on those spot up jumpers. The other third are drives; those have gone a little bit better. And so the thing I wanted to bring up to you, I'm not going to read the full list of names. I'm going to let you choose. So this was compiled before some of the events on Sunday. Williams has the 15th lowest total usage. So this is the Dunc'd on Prime, let's call it, version of the stat. Williams is the 15th lowest total usage of any player who's been on the floor.
And total usage, by the way, just to define it, it's percentage of plays in which you either take a shot, turn it over, or throw a potential assist.
Yeah, and so it's a little bit wider of a definition. The goal is to capture a player's overall role within the offense.
Yeah.
Williams is 15th lowest in the league. I don't want to go through all the names, but are there any on this list that stand out to you as interesting for whatever reason?
Yeah, Gabe Vincent would be it, and I thought he's at 13.2. He's second lowest in the whole league, behind Jericho Sims, as you mentioned, Nick Centers. And Gabe Vincent was like a real player. Like, he would run pick and rolls in Miami, particularly in that 23 playoff run, and throw a few passes. And now he's basically been a spot up guy, and he's not making it. Not that he hasn't certainly earned a larger role in the offense. They're not going to take the ball out of Austin Reeves' hands to give it to him necessarily, but it has been a precipitous drop for him, to be sure.
The other one that stands out to me is Spencer Dinwiddie, and I was like, oh man, why Spencer Dinwiddie only 15.3 total usage? He probably, I'm not going to say he doubled that, but he probably pushed out of this group by taking the ridiculous volume of shots that he did. Now that Luka's out in the Dallas Miami game, in that one on Sunday, which was not in the stats that I compiled, he went 1 for 12 in 28 minutes. So that should probably bump Dinwiddie's total usage out of this range.
Yeah, and back to Cody Williams. Yeah, the efficiency numbers are awful. 19% on threes, 37% on twos, but he's taking so few that if he hits a few, then maybe he'll really boost those numbers. Isaiah Collier been very effective getting to the baskets, hitting 60% of his twos. He came back after missing the first couple weeks of the hamstring injury, but recall in his first game, they put Wembanyama on him, and he was 0 of 6 on threes. And since then, he's made 1 out of 8, but that volume perhaps is even more concerning.
So, I mean, it's the good and the bad with Collier. I hope that the jumper can come around, but yeah, and he was 0 for 1 in the Knicks game, so I can't remember whether I counted that one or not. So for the Jazz, I mean, Williams, his inconsistency in college was maddening for me, and we'll see where this goes. I think they'll give him the ball more as the season progresses, in part because just to see what he has. But it's not, when you draft a young player, it isn't all about what they are in the beginning. It's what can they be later on. So I'm concerned, but I'm not freaked out, especially because some of this stuff with the small usage, like the efficiency numbers, I expect to improve, in part because they can't get a whole lot worse. Where would you like to go?
Let's go to the Wolves.
Minnesota. They are 8-8, a disappointing 2-4 since the last 15-60, especially since I believe 2 of those losses were to the venerable Portland Trailblazers. The Wolves are also 13th in net rating. Plus 1.9 is like being above water, but I mean, we expect the Wolves to be a lot better than that. They're not top 10 on either offense or defense, 12th and 14th respectively. And BPI, skeptical. 42 wins would be 10th in the West. So they would be trying to win 2 road games in the play-in, were that to be correct. Mike Conley has now missed 2 straight games with a left big toe sprain, but they were close and just fell to Boston. I don't believe they got a shot up in the air that could have won the game at the end, but they were close in the end.
Yeah, easily the best moral victory by an ostensible contender in Boston this week. So Anthony Edwards, I mean, we can talk about his 3-point shooting first. 3-point jumpers off the dribble. He has been absolutely unbelievable. He's making a great percentage on team created as well. He is 43% field goal on self-created, 43% just field goal, 3-point percentage on self-created threes, 44% on team created. He is taking 8.2 self-created threes per 100 possessions. That's actually not first. Mitchell and Tatum are both higher than he is there. Overall, his self-created shots are at 70.7%. So that's a high number, but it's not crazy. There are a lot of guys who are much higher. Your leader is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 91.5% of his shots are self-created. He's taking
That's incredible.
He's taking a lot of threes off the dribble as well. Only 16% of Anthony Edwards' threes are uncontested. So that's amazing that he's shooting the percentage that he's shooting on these, with so many of these self-created, so many of them are off the dribble. But he's been very solid with the 61% true shooting. That's 4% above league average. High usage guy. That's certainly is great. But he's only shooting 52% from two. So why is that? Well, big problem has been his off the dribble jumpers from two. He's making a much lower percentage of 2-point jumpers than 3-point jumpers. And it's not even necessarily that they're so much less contested. Another Sport Radar stat, they look at whether jumpers off the dribble are what they consider pressured or not pressured based on the tracking data. So, not pressured is you pull up for a 2 off the pick and roll or something like that off the dribble, like the bigs in a drop, that sort of thing. Pressured would be, usually your man is in your face, or maybe the big is up a little bit more. So he's struggling, shooting 42% on both pressured and not pressured. Or here, excuse me. Let me try again. That is the overall number, including threes. So 2-point jumpers, he is shooting overall 38%, 36% on pressured, 44% on not pressured. And then those off the dribble jumpers from three, shooting 44%. And he's making 49% when pressured. He's at 19 of 39. And when not pressured, he is at still 42%. So amazing shooting by him. Other issue that he's had is his floaters have been pretty bad. And he's also just hasn't taken enough shots at the rim. He has gotten better as a contested finisher per our numbers. He's at 54%. That's within 10 feet. So it includes floaters that are contested around the rim as well. So that's slightly above the league median. But you'd like that still to be a little bit better for a guy with his physical talent, but he used to be in the 40s on that stat. So he's gotten better there. But yeah, only 56 shots at the rim, 17% of shots.
And Nate, along with that rim attempt percentage, Edwards has the ball in his hands a lot on this Wolves team. His free throw attempt rate has actually dropped significantly too. Last year it was 6.6 per 36, which was a career high by a lot. This year it's 4.1 per 36, which would be tied for his career low.
So another thing I wanted to look at is, why is Anthony Edwards not breaking the game? Like, David Locke tweeted this, and most people I'd say, yeah, holy shit, like 44% on this volume of off the dribble threes. Like, defenses must be going crazy to try to take this away. Like, he's, the best thing since Steph Curry and sliced bread. So, that hasn't necessarily been the case. Defenses have been reacting to him to some degree. They've only been in conservative coverages on him less than 50% of the time, either soft or ice. They've been at a little over 48% of the time. So they're showing much more. They are switching a lot more against him. So he is causing the defense to react some. The problem is that he's been unable to take advantage. And he basically never passes to the roll man out of any coverage, right? So let me make sure I get this number right here. He throws the ball to the screener for a 2-point attempt 2.4% of the time. That is a terrible number. That is in the 6th percentile. And yeah, you know what? Like, Rudy Gobert is not the greatest guy, particularly if you're getting blitzed a little bit, or if they're switching to make a play. But that is really bad. So I watched all 5 of those plays. One was to Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and then 3 of them were to Gobert. Or sorry, 5 of them were to Gobert, and 1 was to Walker. There's 6 of those plays total all season that he's thrown it to the roll man for a shot. And that's just, given the fact that the coverages that teams are playing against him and the gravity he has, that's just not acceptable. And those plays actually, they're nice passes, but he just has not been able to find that necessarily. And then even throwing to other 3-point shooters, he'll do that 17% of the time on these picks, but that still is a pretty low number as well. And that, spot up 3 is nice, but it's also not, something that's like really breaking the defense. So he just, in terms of his own getting to the basket or getting to the foul line or setting up his teammates for the same, he has not been able to take advantage of his incredible three-point shooting. It's very valuable because he's still getting those shots up. They're still going in. They still count on the scoreboard. But for his teammates, they have not benefited from this incredible performance yet.
It's fascinating. It's going to be something that we really watch over the course of the season. Anything else on the Wolves?
Now let's move. Actually, one more thing. Two more things here.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting that only 35% of Julius Randle's threes are uncontested. One of the concerns isn't that surprising? Like, one of the concerns that you had was like, oh, they're just going to leave Julius open at the arc and they're going to have no spacing. Well, no, actually what's ended up happening is they're leaving Jaden McDaniels open at the arc and they have no spacing because McDaniels, 81% of his threes are uncontested. He's really just been going through it all season. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is having an unbelievable shooting season so far. But yeah, in case you were wondering, the league median is 56% of your threes are uncontested. 56% of the threes taken in the league are uncontested. Excuse me. That's the wrong way to put it. If it's the median, but yeah. So basically, what that means is the player at the 50th percentile shoots 56% of his threes uncontested. That's a better way to say that. So. Sorry, we got a real stats heavy show here today, so I'll gotta make sure I get it right. But yeah, so I mean, Randall's been hitting shots, but he's taking a lot of tough step backs off the dribble. Like it definitely, you can't blame like his lack of spacing for their problems. We'll put it that way.
No, I think that's completely fair. Speaking of lack of spacing, the Sacramento Kings, they're 8-9 on the season, 2-5 since the last 15-60. They're still, despite that being below 500 in record, they're still plus 2.9, not just positive, plus 2.9 in net rating. That's 12th in the league, 8th on offense, 11th on defense. They did have a disappointing loss at home to the Brooklyn Nets, 108-103 on Sunday. And so the Kings are projected to finish outside of the play-in right now. Per BPI, 39 wins would be 11th. They have a 19% chance of making the playoffs. And it has been an absolutely brutal shooting season for Keegan Murray. He came into tonight shooting 30% on 5.5 threes per 36, and then went 1 for 5 on Sunday. He was, and that attempt rate I think is fascinating because Keegan Murray was over 7 both of his first two leagues in first two seasons of the NBA, and then now he's at like 5.5 per 36. Hopefully that goes up over the course of the year.
Yeah, you'll see this a lot where you might think like, well, they don't have anyone else to take threes, so wouldn't he be taking more? No, and it works the exact opposite, actually. When you have more three-point threats on the floor that the defense has to react to, that gets them in rotation more, and the ball can make it to all these guys, and having more good shooters just begets more threes. Obviously, there's an upper limit on that, but we'll talk about some of these.
I mean, the Celtics are testing that upper limit, but yes. There is one somewhere.
But I think that's actually something that really should be studied in team building is what happens to everyone else's three-point shooting when you add a high volume three-point shooter. And I would say that generally it's going to go up, or at least that the quality of those looks will improve. Now, for Murray, he's shooting very poorly. That happened, of course, last year as well, that 30%. So his volume's gone down because it's like, okay, well, now we're just help off these other dudes. This is the guy we're going to not leave when in the past, like that first year when he was shot amazingly well, they also had Harrison Barnes at the 4. Like Barnes is not amazing, but he shoots it better than DeRozan. And you had Kevin Huerter having the best season of his career from 3. He's really struggled. And the problem is now for them, nobody is really overperforming from 3 among their high volume guys. I wouldn't put Keon Ellis in that category. Fox is about right at his career average. He's in the mid-30s, but Murray is shooting 6.9% worse than his career average. Kevin Huerter is shooting 7.9% worse than his career average. Malik Monk, who should be back soon from the sprained ankle, maybe even came back today. I didn't see that, but he's 8.6%.
He did not play on Sunday.
Okay, so he's 8.6% worse than his career average. So, and then Sabonis is shooting 40%, but 94% of his threes are uncontested, and he still is taking only like 2 a game. It's kind of interesting that he really could get a 3 anytime he wants to, but he really only kind of takes it as a last resort. This is another one that was kind of interesting along the lines of Randall is DeRozan, only 30% of his threes are uncontested. And so that just shows you that he's like not even bothering to spot up. Like he's only taking these as a last resort when he is already on the ball and the shot clock is winding down. And then the other thing that's hurting with DeRozan, as good as he's been for them, is he's only 50% on team created shots. So I wouldn't say that their offensive struggles are his problem, but that does hurt that when you throw it to him that he's not able to convert necessarily. Changing offensive role for Sabonis. Only 35.8% of his shots now are self-created, but he is a complete monster on those. 63.7% on those shots. So he's not attacking as often as he has in the past, but when he gets a matchup he can attack, he just completely destroys it. So he's judicious about his attacks, and he'll just dribble the ball in and bludgeon the guy to the basket and get fouled or score.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm trying to remember which game it was, and where he was just tearing through every single other guy on the roster. I think it was against the Wolves, and
who's not the center, basically. If he gets someone that he can go through, he's like, I really appreciate his mentality in comparison to a lot of bigs. And part of that is because, he doesn't really have a lot of sexy skills other than just like slamming into and shooting a little short range left-handed hook shot or a layup or getting fouled. But he'll just, if he's too strong for the guy, he's just going to go right to that and they can't stop him.
And something that I find interesting, you talked about Sabonis' changing role, is that it's not a surprise that when you add DeMar DeRozan to the mix that any high usage guy, his role is gonna drop a little bit. But for Sabonis, his scoring is about the same. It's in the vicinity of each other. It's the playmaking usage that has really dropped. So it was 15.8 last year, which was highest on the Kings, was higher than Monk, higher than Fox. And then this year he's at 13.2. That is a big drop relative to playmaking for a guy who still has a huge role within their offense.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I pulled up DeRozan from last year as well. Remember, playmaking usage is the percentage of your plays on offense that you throw a potential assist. It could go in or could not go in, but that's the percentage of the time you do that. So the only guy who actually hasn't seen a decrease from last year has been De'Aaron Fox. He's right about 13%, which is kind of average for a point guard, maybe a little bit below. So Sabonis, you mentioned that he's gone down from 15.8% to 13.2%. That's still pretty good, though, obviously, for a center. Malik Monk, we talked about how awesome his playmaking was a year ago. They haven't been utilizing that at all now with DeRozan. That went from 14.7. Again, he hasn't played as many minutes, but 14.7 down to 9.7 playmaking usage. And DeRozan is also seeing a precipitous drop. DeRozan was 12.1% playmaking usage last year. He's at 6.3 this year. So he basically has been a scorer, in part too because they don't have much shooting around him for him. He's much better at spraying passes out to shooters than I think he is finding the roll man. And so, all these guys are just much lower. And of course, there's only one ball. I mean, that's where it kind of shows up. But they have maybe a few too many play starters and not enough play finishers. Sabonis has worked well in that role. Certainly, like his self-created is at 68% field goal percentage. Or sorry, not self-created. His team created is
okay.
But he's at 63% self-created, which is also
still
amazing. Good. Yeah, that's really good. So, they just everyone's kind of had to adjust. And then they just don't have enough play finishers on this team because guys can't make shots from the outside. So, it seems like it could go one of two ways. Like they've had a very easy schedule, although a frequent schedule so far. They're under 500 against that schedule. They just lost at home to the Nets, as you mentioned, which they've had a couple of bad losses recently. And some other ones like against the Clippers where they just weren't that competitive. So are they going to kind of lose heart and this team is just it's not going to work? And they're, the fact that there's only one ball is being a problem, that maybe they end up trading Malik Monk or something, or are they just going to make more 3-pointers and then their offense will be really good? Like their defense has been as good as you could have hoped so far, I would say. So I'm very interested to see where this team goes over the next 10 games or so, because it seems like they are either on the precipice of playing a lot better or playing a lot worse because the schedule gets harder, but they also could actually make more shots.
Yeah, briefly to run through their next 10 games. Thunder, Wolves, Blazers, Spurs, Rockets, Grizz, Spurs, Jazz, Lakers. So lots of good teams.
Not awful. I mean, they have some winnable games, but
they do.
Yeah.
But we'll get clarity on what kind of team the Kings are. Unfortunately, at least for the current iteration, which thankfully will be changing soon, we have clarity on what the New Orleans Pelicans are right now.
4-13, 1-6. That one win was over the Denver Nuggets without Nikola Jokic. 1-6 over the last 2 weeks. 29th in net rating, negative 12.9. 27th on offense, 29th on defense. They project for 14th in the West, 33 wins, interestingly enough. Still given a 1% chance at the playoffs. Brandon Ingram has parted ways from his agency, Excel Sports.
Second Pelicans star forward to change agencies in the last week.
I mean, it doesn't seem possible they could both end up in the same place, right? But clearly Ingram not happy that he hasn't been able to get an extension, and he's just had a really, really tough lift so far this season as well. Looking at that uncontested threes number, 10% of his threes have been uncontested.
Oh,
and Ingram doesn't do himself a ton of favors too, because he doesn't create uncontested shots for himself. Again, he's always among the lowest players in the league, and he's there again this year as well in our predictive shot quality model. That's I guess I shouldn't say it's predictive, but our shot quality model that basically measures how contested the shot is, plus where he's taking it. He takes a lot of contested mid-rangers as you end up there, but he's well below even the likes of like DeRozan and Kevin Durant, other mid-range mavens in that category. What else can we take away from these guys, if anything?
Honestly, not a ton. I mean, to use a legal term, and I have that background, a probative value. Basically, it's like what can you take from this? I don't think there's really much that you get from the Pelicans so far this year. It would have been an opportunity to evaluate Dyson Daniels on ball, but he's in Atlanta. We've talked about him and the Hawks over a course of time. So the player I wanted to look at is Yves Missi. I was very high on Missi as a draft prospect. This is not like a full rescout or anything like that, but I wanted to look at some of the elements of his game so far. And Missi contesting about 29% of opponent shots, and they're making 56.3% of the attempts that Missi contests. Those numbers are actually pretty similar to two players that I thought were interesting. One, Jaren Jackson Jr. from last year, which was not Jaren Jackson Jr.'s best rim protecting season. And also Donovan Clingan. That's what Donovan Clingan's actually doing with a knee injury right now. We'll talk about that in a second. But Missi, and in terms of contested field goal percentage on those contested shots, they're similar. They're not in other ways. And what's dragging Missi down in the kind of rim protection wins, the overall rim protector stuff, is that opponent rim attempts overall when Missi's on the floor are pretty high. And while the Pelicans in prior years have sold out pretty hard to prevent rim attempts, they've been 10th fewest or better in terms of proportion of opponent shots at the rim each of the prior 3 seasons. I think that's personnel based because the Pelicans, this iteration of the Pelicans has so few capable perimeter defenders. They don't have Herb Jones available. They don't have Jose Alvarado available, a number of these different guys. So they can't, even if Willie Green wanted to run that scheme, they couldn't. And so, Nate, a question I wanted to ask you was Missi's offensive rebound rate, 14% of Pelicans misses, defensive rebound rate, 19% of opponent misses. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, a lot of guys with this body type will kind of be that way. Like Onyeka Okongwu is one of them as well. Historically, who's kind of struggled with that. So, yeah, you see these more jumping jack guys, like offensive rebounding can be about positioning if you're a Steven Adams type, but it can also be about kind of being slippery, your effort level, your explosiveness. So, yeah, I mean, he's not like a great box out guy, and he's not really, he's a rookie. He's going to get kind of thrown around a little bit. So you see that a lot with guys of this ilk, and certainly as well, you noted how they're getting a lot of shots at the rim. When he's out there, that's going to lead to more offensive rebounds generally as well for the opponent. So I'd like to see with both this and the rim protection stuff, what does it look like when they get Herb back and they get DeJounte Murray back and they have some modicum of the perimeter defense that they were hoping to have this year? And let's see what he looks like there, because certainly the lift for him has been far too heavy thus far.
Couple other Messi defensive stats. His 4.2 block percentage, or if you like per 36, is 1.6. That 4.2 block percentage would have been tied for 21st last year, same as Isaiah Hartenstein and Ivica Zubac. So that's not bad company to have, but those guys are also they could be better rim protectors than just the block percentage. And that's well below the 5% and above shot blockers like Rudy Gobert, like Derek Lively. So it's not the worst place to be, but you'd maybe like to see that be a little bit better. And then I wanted to look briefly at how the Pelicans are doing with the math problem stuff, going back to the Budenholzer Bucks, with Messi on and off the floor. I bring this stuff up a lot with Brook Lopez, and you don't want to necessarily do the on-off, meaning the comparing the two things as equals, because this Pelicans team has been so injured. Availability of centers has been a big problem. The good news is that the Pelicans really aren't fouling when Messi's on the floor, and that actually shifts significantly when he sits. So maybe there is something to having Messi on the floor that helps that. They are taking more shots at the rim when Messi's on the floor than when he's off, but the field goal percentage is better it's better for the Pelicans. It's worse for the opponents when he plays. And as you brought up with the individual defensive rebounding, the Pels are horrible on the defensive glass when Messi is out there. And while they have an awful defensive rating, almost 124 when he's on the floor, some of that is his teammates, and some of that is also Pelicans opponents shooting almost 41% on three in those minutes and killing the Pels in transition. I'm not going to be super worried about Messi's part in that. And just as a kind of part of this, the most used Pelicans lineup when Yves Messi has been on the floor is Messi, Brandon Ingram, BJ Boston, Javonte Green, and Trey Murphy. There is no point guard. There is no guard at all. I mean, Trey is a 2-3. In that, it's just, so by the way, do you want to get, I don't know if you looked at it, do you want to guess the net rating of that lineup?
Oh, I said, that's why I covered my eyes. Yeah. It's negative 30. It's not very good.
With an 84.6 offensive rating.
Yeah. Turns out that having someone who can dribble is important. What have you made of him offensively? Anything stick out there?
So in my draft scout, I talked about Yves Messi as kind of being before a work in progress, like he kind of needed to get there. And I think that's mostly borne out. 53% from the field when every attempt that you do is inside 10 feet isn't great, but
no.
Messi's 66% in the restricted area versus 26% field goal percentage from floater range. So he's making the shots around the basket. But only 30% of Messi's attempts are dunks. Now the lob, I picked a player, not at random, but Lob City DeAndre Jordan was over 50% of his field goal attempts at dunks, but he had players who were actually feeding the ball, most notably Chris Paul. And DeAndre Jordan converted over 70% of his shots in the restricted area in his best years, some closer to 75. But the reason why I wanted to do that was I think Messi's archetype in time is a player who finishes but doesn't post up or anything like that. So it's going to be putbacks. It's going to be lobs around the rim. And I think he can be reasonable at those in time. But
he's got to be one of these high 60s true shooting guys.
Has to be. And because he shouldn't be taking anything that isn't a high EV shot. He's just not good enough at those. So I would say, it's you don't want to evaluate a player based on this sample, because this sample does no one any favors in terms of probative value, as I mentioned it before. But I would say parts of it are a little bit promising. I think he's been okay.
He hasn't been their worst player.
Not even close. And I think that you're looking at, is this guy good at what he's supposed to be good at? And I think for the most part that is true in both eye tests, because I saw the Pelicans twice, and in person, and watched them more than I feel comfortable saying. And then the offensive game is a work in progress, but I expected that. And so I'm feeling okay. I had him higher than most people did. I had him way higher than his draft position. And based on how some of the guys in this class have thrown out, I think I might be okay there, but I'm really hopeful to see what we can evaluate over the course of not a full season, but over with better teammates. And CJ looks like he's coming back pretty soon. We don't really know yet. I mean, Zion and Alvarado are probably going to be a while. So
yeah, Herb Jones too. Still out. I mean,
still without a timetable.
Herb Jones, I mean, might be their second most important player. I mean, he might be their most important player because they had some redundancies with Zion and with Ingram. We got one more team here. Let's do the Blazers.
7-10 on the season, 4-3 since the last 15-60. They unfortunately they don't get to play the Wolves every game, just half of those games seems like. 26th in net rating, -7.6, dead last in offense, 15th on defense. That's an interesting little split. Predicted to win 35 games. That is 13th, so third to worst in the Western Conference. And a couple of injury news for them just at the outset. Scoot Henderson has missed 2 straight games with a back strain. He may play Monday against the Grizzlies, listed as questionable. And then, unfortunately, Donovan Clingan, he hurt his knee in the third quarter on Saturday, and he did play with a sleeve, but now he's out with what's called a left knee sprain. So I'm a little bit concerned about this. Like, he tried to play through it, but then if you're going to miss a game, like, I don't think this is going to be like, I'm hoping it's not a multi like month thing or something like that. But I would like to see more of Clingan, and so I'm sad that he might miss some time.
Yeah, and Clingan also is now up to 57.8% true shooting, becoming the first high-minute Blazer to be above the league average in true shooting, although well below the league average for centers who usually...
Hey, let's take what we can get, Nate.
Centers usually have around 62% true shooting. League average this year so far is 57%. Rob Williams, once he plays enough games, if he plays enough games, pretty good bet to also be over there. He's at 80% true shooting in 6 games. And then Clingan, his rim protection stats, 50% allowed at the rim. That is awesome. When he's in position, he's a major problem, but only 29% contest rate. That is below the positional average. And for a guy who is rarely, if ever, going to be out on the floor defensively, although he has actually blocked a few jumpers, he's gotten guys. We saw that in film at Connecticut too. Mm-hmm. But generally, he's going to be staying around the basket as much as possible. So only contesting 29%, like that does raise my eyebrows a little bit. That maybe like the mobility is not quite there. Danny, would you care to guess DeAndre Ayton, who's been out for a couple weeks now, coinciding with this 4-3 stretch, by the way, with this finger issue? Would you care to guess DeAndre Ayton's contest rate on shots at the rim when he's in the game?
So my instinct is, I mean, so you think about schemes, and I don't think of the Blazers as like bringing him out, like, you know.
No, I checked on that. He definitely is playing mostly
in the soft, the conservative coverages, we'll call it. The conservative coverages. So let's see. So like Steven Adams is around, I think he's in the high 20s. So maybe he's around there, like high 20s, like 27, 28.
How's 14.6% grab you?
What?
Well, actually, he's not close enough to grab you. Probably.
No, he's not.
Where
is he?
He's stuck at home. There's an ice storm. I mean, granted, that's a small sample, but no other center is anywhere close. I've never seen like a pure center below 20%. I mean, there's
okay.
Like
I'm just tooling around. He's only played 37 minutes, but Bones Highland's contest rate is about that.
Yeah, it just. I mean, and I looked it up. He's playing a conservative coverage over 75% of the time. So it's not like he's switching out of the perimeter, and it's just. That is unbelievably bad. And also, he's at 54% true shooting, too. Like, he's below the league average. I mean, he kind of skated away, and, like, he had some big scoring games late in the season last year, but while he was out there, he is one of the worst players in the NBA. I mean, these numbers are execrable. Not one of the worst players in the NBA is Shaedon Sharpe. Yeah.
Can I mention that Luka Doncic has a higher contest rate than DeAndre Ayton?
And Luka is switching on to guys a lot. We went over that at the beginning of the podcast. So Shaedon Sharpe had a really nice game against Atlanta. He's been up and down some, but certainly has given them, particularly in the games when either Simons or Scoot has been out, a pretty good second option on the ball. The Atlanta game, though, he was fantastic. He actually went right at Dyson Daniels a few times and scored on him. Another pretty cool play that they ran, Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker used to run this play where they would he would throw it to the wing to Manu and then kind of saunter backdoor like he's just cutting through, and Manu would catch the defense napping with this lob pass. They ran that little action, but for a dunk for Shaedon Sharpe, that looked really good. So he had 13 points and 5 assists in the third, and then he hit this ridiculous step back three late clock to give them the lead over Atlanta with under a minute remaining. So he's shown some flashes. He's right about league average in terms of his efficiency so far. In his career, he's shooting well over 40% on open threes. So I believe in his shooting. His getting to the basket has been pretty good. I would have hoped with his athleticism that he could do more on the defensive end or as a rim protector. Those I haven't seen anything in the numbers to indicate that that's any good. But still, it's been an encouraging return for him. It looks like hasn't been badly damaged by the time that he's missed. Another guy who's returning is Rob Williams, and he still has that crazy length that can surprise jump shooters so far. I think he's working his way back into shape. He was never a guy who could play a lot of minutes all in a row. You would see him get tired out there. Like that's definitely been the case. When he's fresh, he can still make ridiculous plays. Like I would say he looks pretty similar to the way he looked in that last Boston year in 23. There was one play where he double teams in the post after he had switched on a Fred VanVleet. They kick it out to VanVleet. He slides out from the lane, runs VanVleet off the line on a pump fake. VanVleet tries to pump fake, dribble, replace, and then Rob blocks his three from behind. Awesome. So there's still plays that he's able to make that, there are a few guys who can make them, and he just still gets off the ground quickly. He gets his hand up quickly. He has very fast hands, so he can surprise guys with his contests. And when guys try to go at him, he's usually able to really bother them pretty well. But especially when he's tired, he'll make some bad decisions. Like he closed way out on Alex Caruso and just like flew past him and gave up a layup in that game. But he also is able to really bother the Isaiah Hartenstein floater in that same game against OKC, which is that you see how high Hartenstein shoots that floater. So Portland has been very competitive of late at 7-10. We'll see when Scoot comes back. I imagine they'll be starting Simon. Simon's really had his first good stretch in that game against Houston that they won and really seemed to enjoy. So, the Blazers, this West is just an unbelievable bear. I mean, we did predict somebody's going to drop down out of the group that we thought were going to be contenders. That's the Pels. They just haven't really had an NBA team out there. But basically everybody else other than the Jazz is a team that could beat you on any given night. And that's this West has been pretty incredible. That has not so much been the case with the Eastern Conference. All right, we are done here. Thanks so much for watching on YouTube. You can give us a like and subscribe, would be much appreciated. You can check this out, of course, in your podcast player. If you're listening there for the first time, just give us a subscribe there, or consider subscribing to Dunc'd on Prime, ad-free, and you'll also get, during most weeks, 6 pods a week, including Hollinger and Duncan. We're going to be a little bit lighter this week because of the holiday, so our next episodes will be Tuesday and Friday for the NBA Cup games, and of course, we're doing the live show on NBA League Pass. Knicks, Nuggets, tomorrow at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. So hope to see you in there as well. Until next time. All right, I think that was a good show.
I agree.